Hsieh might be one of the most humble servant leaders you will ever meet. He helped grow Earthlink into a billion-dollar company, but chose a radically different path, capping his income at the national median and investing the rest into revitalizing communities like Pomona in California. Today, he's leading an airline company, supporting nonprofits, and still living with the same open-handed posture that marked his earliest days of faith. This episode is packed with wisdom on business, calling, humility, and how to lead with deep conviction. For anyone pursuing servant leadership with open hands and a humble heart, this one's for you. Tom, thank you for being on the Servant Leadership Podcast.
Really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
The first time I met you was speaking at a large event, and it was just amazing. You had everyone's hearts moved. Before we get into why that happened, I would love to hear a little bit about your business background and what your business career looked like in the early days.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let me go way back and talk about, I guess, my career started with JPL. I worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratories in the early 90s. And then an internet startup company in the Los Angeles area called Earthlink Networks, was recruiting around the lab. And so I joined Earthlink, but it was kind of an interesting story. So actually, I may have to take one more step back.
Go for it.
Okay, all right. So I graduated with a physics degree from Harvey Mudd College. And when I graduated, kind of this renewal of my faith as a Christian while I was in college, studying physics and science of all things, but really a renewal of my faith and a sense of conviction of what God's justice should look like according to the scriptures, and that impacted me in a greater way than I've had previously, and I was convicted of two things when I graduated. One was that God really has a love for the poor, and the second thing that I was convicted of is that I do not have a love for the poor. And I felt like what God invited me to consider at that time was He said, "Well, Tom, you know where my heart is, and where I am, and what I'm working on. Where are you? Where are you going?" And so at that time, I actually had some job offers from aerospace. That's a common pathway for physics majors. And I decided to turn down those job offers, and I joined a Christian organization called Servant Partners. Servant Leadership. Servant Partners works in urban communities around the world. And they had a 2-year internship based in Pomona. I was placed on the team in Pomona. That's how I ended up here in Pomona. I was part of that team, and the purpose was to train us to be able to go overseas and live in an incarnational way to bring God's shalom, well-being, and prosperity, to these challenging urban areas. And so at the end of the 2 years, most of my teammates ended up going overseas, but I really felt like the calling for my life was to stay and work for the Shalom here in the city of Pomona. So it's been about 30-some years now, and so that's really been part of my life calling. Wow. Okay, but in the meantime, I also, my career also advanced. So even though I took that 2 years doing that internship, I was working at JPL, and I was being recruited by this internet startup called Earthlink. And I remember the third round of interviews, sitting across the table from 3 of the company executives, and they're explaining how this internet thing was really going to become a big thing, right? This was the early days, so no one, the internet didn't quite exist yet. And so they were trying to hire, folks with networking backgrounds from places like Jet Propulsion Laboratories. And I thought this looked really exciting. And I came in there and I said, I'm really excited about this company and this technology. I just need you to understand that I'll need my hours to be from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. because I need to get back to Pomona for these after-school programs I'm committed to. And they looked at me like I was crazy, like who forgot to tell this guy that he's interviewing at an internet startup company, right? I mean, literally, there was like sleeping bags on the floor, pizza boxes stacked to the sky. In the corner, there was a guy slumped over on this keyboard, right? Had fallen asleep, and in a couple hours he's going to wake up, he's going to pop open a can of Jolt and, type away until midnight, right? Until he falls asleep again. And who's this young, guy without a clue asking to set his hours from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. But in that moment, in that awkward silence, I just had this prompt and I just said, well, we've come this far, third round interviews, why don't we give it a try and judge me based on the work I get done, not in the hours I'm here. And miraculously, they said, okay. So that's how I ended up working at Earthlink. When I joined, the technical team was just 9 other engineers and myself. We were working out of a converted dentist office, actually maybe about the same size or smaller as this room that we're sitting in now. And in that first month, we had to knock down the wall to the lawyer's office next door to expand our service because we were growing so fast. So about a month later, my boss comes to me and he taps me on the shoulder and says, we need to speak. We need to talk. I said, sure, in my office. And his office was the broom closet, and we step in there. And he says, well, Tom, we've been watching you work. I'm like, okay. He says, and we decided we want to give you a promotion. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I would love a promotion. As long as you understand, I'll need my hours to be from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And so I was with Earthlink for 10 years, growing with the company to VP of engineering, helped grow that technical team from the 9 engineers to 450 engineers nationwide, network engineers, software engineers, systems engineers. And through our IPO, we were one of the early .coms, $1.2 billion on the NASDAQ exchange. So it was quite a ride, quite an incredible ride. But actually, the funny thing is, through all that, one of the things that was most impactful for my life was being involved in the after-school program after 3 p.m., right? Seeing the lives of these kids and these families, grow and transform. And that's so. Anyway, so that's my early days. Since you asked about the early days of my career,
and I've so many Earthling questions that I want to get to. But one thing before I get to those that I want to acknowledge and maybe ask you to talk about is you shared a little bit about what you felt like God was putting on your heart early, and then you talked about this Earthling success, and obviously leading all of those engineers and going public. There was a lot of money to be made. There was just a lot of money to be made. And you and Bree, your wife, chose to make some pretty, what the world would call, are drastic decisions on how you would choose to live. Talk about that journey to our audience.
Sure. I guess it gets a little bit unconventional, the choices we made. But when the company went public, having been an executive and early employee, my stock options at that point were probably worth a couple $1 million, and it was a crazy day around the office. I mean, I remember, administrative assistants and mailroom clerks showing up the next day in their Audi TTs, and it was just, and I show up to work with my car. It was, a Geo Metro. And in that time, because of where we live, and our work in the community, I mean, our expenses were very low. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment in one of the rougher parts of the city, and we had made a decision that how do we think about our finances, and we thought it would be helpful to have a limit, and so we set a limit for ourselves to live at or below the median household income level for the nation. And at that point, the median household income for the nation was $48,000 a year. That meant half the households in the nation lived on 48,000 more, and half the household live in 48,000 less, and so that's where we set it. Median household income to these days, and for California, it's probably somewhere around 90,000, 92, I think, for a family of four, and we're just around there still. Right? We just felt like it's been a helpful watermark of things. Some years we're a little higher, some years we're a little lower, but it's been a really wonderful, I'd say joyful, watermark for us, and because it's freed us tremendously for freed us up to a lot of fun things, right? With the rest of our income, as the Lord has directed us, and it also gives us a lot of internal freedom, right?
Well, and I know and we'll get into this later too, but I know the impact you've made on multiple communities, especially Pomona, has been now generational. How you've just been able to help shape what a community could look like. So before we get to that, thinking through the Earthlink side of things, you talked about going from being in a room with 9 other engineers to now you're in charge of 450 engineers. And you didn't go to school for leadership training or to learn to be a servant leader necessarily, or even to understand how to build a team like that. What were some leadership challenges and some leadership lessons along that journey, especially going public that quickly?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I really was fortunate to have the mentorship of some great managers in those early days. And I would say, my direct manager, Trent, was, a servant leader. And others, in the company, not everyone, but, there were servant leaders there that I really had the benefit of learning from, right? Watching their example, but also being mentored by them in terms of how to think about things. So I really felt like that was a gift, to me. And then by the time I had that position, I realized, I didn't have that education. I didn't have that training. So I did go back. I got an executive MBA from the Drucker School of Management, and I appreciated that program particularly just because of its focus on the social responsibility of management, right? Which in itself, communicates a little bit of the social servant, the servant leadership undergirding of that philosophy, right? That there's a social responsibility, to business and to management, and that's influenced me quite a bit. Yeah.
So you've been able to get extremely involved in the city of Pomona, just outside of downtown LA, and you've seen it go from being somewhere that I would say maybe when you first lived here, people didn't seek out to live in Pomona, to now somewhere that people want to be. You've seen just a big transition in the last few decades. Talk about why you even got involved or why you cared so deeply about the community and seeing it really be revitalized.
So I mentioned, having been involved as an intern with Servant Partners here, and really through studying the book of Nehemiah in the Bible, where Nehemiah helps to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem, and the way the community, rallied together, right, to rebuild a community together, physically rebuild a wall. And it just inspired by that, but also convicted at the same time, could that happen here? And that was my prayer, Lord, would you help us make that happen here? And at that time, I was also convicted through mentorship of other leaders, particularly others that did urban work, like John Perkins. Had attended a class conference he led, and I remember words like if you're in an urban community and you're there for 5 years, you've done more harm than good. I'm like, wow. And if you're there for 10 years, you break even. If you're there for 15 years, you start to see some fruit. I'm like, oh, this is a long-term process. This is a long-term commitment. And so I think we started collaborating with, we call our group of little co-conspirators, collaborators in the city. One who we just met, Josh Odek and others, and our mayor, Tim Sandoval, and many others I cannot name, on, what would a 50-year plan look like, right? What would the 50-year vision look like for the city? The city had been in decline for several decades. It had extremely high, violent, extreme violence issues, drug issues, gang issues, human trafficking. And it's still struggling with some of those, but it's made some amazing progress. It's just incredible. It's really been amazing. There was this real sense of hopelessness. I know that about 20 years ago, the school district did a survey of all their high school students, and just try to get a sense of what was the emotional state, the psychological state. And the majority of them responded, they did not see a future for themselves. That they did not believe, they were not believe that they would either live to see their 18th birthday because of the gang violence, or they'd end up in jail. And to see that transform, over those years has been really incredible, really amazing. And then even just on a macroscopic level, I love to point this out on a macroscopic level. So the local newspaper, Daily Bulletin, published this article in 2017. City of Pomona faces fiscal cliff. $10 million in deficits, decades of deficits for, will, certainly to be insolvent, right? Okay. And to, in May of 2024, just last year, published an article, Hsieh of Pomona on track for $8 million surplus in their city budget. Yeah. Having, replenished its reserve, account. So that's just amazing, the transformation in those years. And, but it's taken leadership, right? And so grateful for the leadership that's stepped up and been part of the city's change.
This is going to be a hard question for you to answer. But one of the ways I described you, even to my business partner, was from the second Tom says hello, you're going to understand that he is one of the most humble people you'll ever meet. And even just hearing the deficit to the surplus, it glosses over the actual impact that you made on making that happen. And you are truly a very humble person. If some of our listeners are wondering what culture might tell them, is tell everyone what you did specifically to make things great, and praise all the great work you've done yourself. That's not been your approach, and it served you really well. How does somebody learn humility like you have?
Oh my goodness.
I told you it'd be a tough question.
Oh boy, yeah, that's it's funny. Let me share a story.
Yeah.
My wife and I have this practice where before we make major life decisions, we gather people around us to pray for us. People around, and so like when we bought our house, when we actually, we at one point we finally moved out of our apartment because we had 2 kids. We kind of had this kind of a fostered situation too, as we had 3 kids, and our 2-bedroom apartment just wasn't big enough, and but we felt like was this a faithful thing to do? Is this something? And so we gather folks around us to pray for us, and they're like, no, this is a healthy thing. You should, and I had the sense from the Lord telling me, I'm moving you. I'm like, I actually had the sense of hearing that myself to
Wow.
feel release from the apartments where we're living, because there's just so much. We were just so embedded, right? There was just so much happening around us all the time, and people come over at 1:30 wanted to knock on doors because they needed something, or if someone's car broke down in the morning and they need a ride somewhere, or kids need to pick up, and we're just part of the community, and so feel like moving at home just felt like it just creates more distance, right? Just creates more distance. But because of the commitments we had to these kids, right, and our own as well as others, we felt like, okay, this makes sense. This is something we needed to do. Anyway, another time, another big decision was I had a job offer. It was a C-suite position, Fortune 500 company, another Fortune 500 company that seemed really like attractive to me. I love the brand of this company. This salary and the title, and a lot of the things they were offering, were very attractive, and but I didn't have a sense of peace on this. So we gathered our community around to pray for us, and including my brother, was there at this gathering with folks in our community. Well, one thing my brother said, right, as you were praying, he says, Tom, your arc, the arc of your life is God humbling you. I'm like, gee, thanks, brother. That's really helpful. But so to answer that question first, I'll just say, I think I'm just glad that God's hasn't given up on me, right, and has has cared enough, right, to keep working on me, and brought opportunities to help keep things in perspective, understand my place as someone that's broken and not perfect and in need of His grace, and so joyful and grateful for His grace, and so joyful and grateful for His mercies in my life, His blessings in my life, and all the things I have. I mean, it's amazing, the blessings I've had in my life. It's incredible. And it's just so grateful for that. And so it's helpful to see all that and have the perspective also of, the friends, I talked about this internship that I was on, right? And all the folks in Servant Partners, these friends, these colleagues who have chosen to live in these urban slums around the world, right? Some of them living in shacks, in shanty towns. And I think of the sacrifice they make, for the sake of being able to love others, right, with their lives, to pour themselves out. I'm like, wow, that's just so incredible. Like, what am I doing? Right? And so that's a beautiful thing. Anyway, let's go back to that prayer time. Just to not leave things hanging, but the conclusion of that was, the sense of the whole group was that was not the job for me. Someone in that group said, the Lord can give you a C-suite job in any company He wants anytime, but this is not the one for you. And so I was grateful to be able to have that kind of input, right, from our community, that in one sense is humbling, right, because it's I think the act of submission, is helpful in terms of keeping me humble. And that submission, takes a lot of forms. Sometimes it's turning down a job offer. Sometimes it's stepping off a board, so, and that's, there have been times when that's been challenging in my life. And you think back and you're like, why was that so hard? But in a moment, like there was a nonprofit that I helped found here in the city, Pomona Hope. I think it's 22 years now running, which is amazing. Praise God. But, I was the founding president of the organization. Really injected a lot of energy, right? And it's just really love to see this organization come together, serve the kids and families of our community. And after the first year, really had a strong sense from the Lord that I was supposed to step off the board, that I was supposed to And it was a really hard decision for me. But it was an act of submission. I was like, okay, Lord, because you're calling me to, I will step off. But I think that helps, it helps me. Like it's not about me, right? It's not about me. And Paul's gone, continue, like 22 years now, continue to prosper and serve and, impact people's lives. And it can't be about me, right? And I think that's dangerous, right? I think the moment it is or does, then those things are coverted, or what's that word? It's co-opted, right? They're corrupted, right? By my own ego or by my whatever it is. And so I don't want that. So I'm just grateful, I guess is what I'm saying.
A lot of prayer and open-handedness, it sounds like. So in that process, one big decision that must have come up is later to become CEO of an airline company. So that transition from early tech startup to airline companies seem like drastically different industries.
Yeah.
But maybe tying back to your initial, what you studied roots.
Yeah.
How did this even come about?
Yeah. Well, okay. So it's kind of a funny background story, but for a number of years, I had started after I left Earthlink. I started a number of businesses. My wife and I helped start up a number of nonprofits as well in the city, and then for a number of years, I was focused on some political changes in our city, right? So after working in the city of Pomona for at that point, a couple of decades, realized all the work we were putting into like education, healthcare, workforce development, et cetera. It was just it felt like it was pouring water into a leaky bucket. We realized that there was a layer of political corruption in the city that was really sabotaging the future of our families. And so when my friend Tim Sandoval stepped forward and said he was willing to run for mayor, he's a servant leader. He's a community leader. He's a servant leader. I just felt the conviction I needed to get behind him. Ended up being his volunteer campaign manager.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't a plan, but we went up against a 18-year incumbent on city council who had us out fundraised 3-1. 85% of the incumbents' donations were from outside the city. So it's interesting to see who was funding his campaign. But we did a grassroots campaign, block by block, precinct by precinct, district by district, and actually won by a landslide. Praise the Lord. And then 2 years later, helped 3 new council members who were aligned with our mayor get elected as well. So there was a majority of the city council then that was aligned with the mayor. And that level of servant leadership really has been what's been transformative for our city. When we talk about that budget, fiscal transformation, right? That's that leadership team, right? When we look at some of the civic transformation that's happened in the city, it's because of that leadership, that servant leadership from the top, that leadership team. There's just so much transformation. And I don't know if you know that at one point Fuller Seminary had made a decision to move to the city of Pomona.
Yep.
So the way that, and I think I shared with you, the way that started was, one day before work, I was praying and I felt like God told me to reach out to Fuller Seminary and invite them to move to the city of Pomona. And I'm like, really? And so I did. I reached out to, their CFO at the time, asked for lunch and shared, this sense I had from the Lord. He was very polite and said, well, thank you for that invitation, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I said, that's fine. I just, following through on my sense. And now, I've done my, I've done my job, right? I've done my part. And then, but if you don't mind, we'll just keep in, we can keep in touch. He said, sure. So every month I kept sending them listings of property in City of Pomona. And six months later, they call back and say, hey, President Laverton and I would like to come out and visit you in your city and to come on a tour. Eventually ended up in the board of directors, holding a full day meeting here in the city and doing a tour and meeting our new mayor, other city leaders, talking about the civic transformation, the fiscal transformation, some of the educational transformation. And, my challenge to the organizations, and the thing I keep praying for is, Lord, how are you going to bring about the spiritual transformation of the city? And maybe, that was, a role that, Fuller Seminary could play in helping come and bring a spiritual transformation to the city as well. During the pandemic, that actually ended up, they actually brought property in the city just across the street from here. They bought up, assembled a whole bunch of property and, had designs for a new campus. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, that all fell through when that got put on pause. Which leads into the story. Sorry, that's a big segue into the airline. Anyway, as some of the political work was wrapping up, and as well as these conversations with Fuller Seminary, I was trying to explore, well, what's next for me, right? What do I focus on next? And I didn't know if it was just more community stuff, how do I help to continue to, support the political work that's happening in the city, some of the economic development processes potentially, but, gather a group of people around to pray for me again. And at that point, I was also exploring this idea of this concept, the startup idea of a startup airline we call Float, which, Float stands for Fly Over All Traffic, right? So LA being the 6th largest, worst traffic area in the world, with over 1 million people doing 90-minute commutes each way. So that's 3 hours a day on the road. Finding that there are 40 general aviation airports that you could fly between, reducing these 3-hour commutes down to 15 minutes, and thought, hey, it would be an interesting business plan to put together, a air transportation business. And I started working on that idea, and out of that per time, the consensus, unanimous consensus was that I should go do that, and also start pulling out of leadership roles in the city. Which is a little harder than I thought you would think. I mean, I think at that point it had started taking some root in terms of my sense of identity, right? My sense of ownership. But again, it was a humbling thing, right? To say, okay, it's not mine, right? I'm not responsible for it. The Lord's been responsible for all this. I've had the amazing blessing of, play a role, and play a part in it. And there's all these other leaders, and the Lord will keep carrying it forward. And so that was the consensus of it. And I know it was hard for some of those folks in that prayer team too, because, some of them, we had plans to work together on some new project, and they knew that giving me this, advice would mean that, the projects that we were working on, they would have to head up alone or find some other way to do it. And so sacrificial on their side too, to be able to give me this advice. But that's how I ended up going to Float. And
so it evolved, and now you're doing a lot of stuff. Talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah. So the way that evolved was, so we launched Float in end of February of 2020. And we had 2 great weeks of operation, and then March 15th, the county issued their stay-at-home orders with the pandemic. And so we're like, well, what do we do now? And, I'd raised some venture capital to launch that business. And a number of investors, called me and said, well, Tom, no one saw this coming. It's not your fault. We're just going to write it off. And at that point, the team and I, were playing with an idea. We said, well, hold on. We're playing with an idea. We're looking at something. And what we were looking at was this airline in Alaska called Raven Alaska that had gone bankrupt. And because they were shut down, there were 20 communities in Alaska that could not see a doctor, buy groceries, or get their U.S. Postal Service. They were completely isolated without aviation. And we saw an opportunity. We're like, well, even if we just if half of their business was cargo and medical related, even if we just did that half, could we build a business that was sustainable through the pandemic and serve the community good? And we convinced ourselves that there was a model there, and so that's how we pivoted to restarting Raven Alaska and running it through the pandemic. Providing service to these communities, and then while we were in Alaska, based in Anchorage, had the brilliant idea of launching a Trans-Pacific airline, which is now called New Pacific Airlines, to connect Asia and North America through a hub in Anchorage, Alaska, kind of a center point. So folks are familiar with, airlines like Iceland Air. It'd be kind of like an Iceland Air on the Pacific side. And, so we acquired some Boeing 757s, started putting together this effort, capabilities to do that, had got, DOT Economic Authority, was set to launch this, and then the war in Ukraine broke out. And so that closed the Russian airspace to us. And as a new airline, without that ability, we need a new certification called ETOPS. And ETOPS, for a new airline, it takes a minimum like 18 to 24 months to attain from the FAA. So that we had to pivot again. And so now New Pacific currently is doing sports charters. We're flying 6 NHL teams and a couple of Major League Baseball teams, and June doing some World Cup flying, etc. While we were waiting for, maybe the war to end, or Russian airspace to open up, or our ETOPS certification. So, yeah.
I mean, just even hearing about all those throughout the years, all the speed bumps that have happened and how you've adapted and changed so quickly. When you're talking to your team about change at this point, it's almost to be expected. How do they deal with it, and how do you instill a sense of ownership and servant leadership in their minds too, amidst chaos and potential uncertainty? Yeah,
no, that's really tough. And I'm so grateful for my team, right? And because, it's they're the ones that make it happen. And so I think the most important thing I bring to that team, both a sense of respect, an understanding of, the really gratefulness for what they bring to the table, and respect for their expertise, respect for their hard work, and as well as, leadership in terms of helping, knowing that, we might make some hard decisions, but it's never about, one person's whim or or something like that, right? It's like what's the best path forward for the company, right? What's the best path forward for the greatest number of people? What's going to serve the community, serve our employees, serve preserve the business to have a chance in the future, right? And sometimes those those decisions are hard, right? Sometimes that requires hard decisions, but it's, but when they are equipped with the facts, when they're equipped with the understanding the trade-offs, what's reality, what's where are we financially, what's what are the challenges before us, and when they know that, right, when they know that, and we all look at that together, I think it helps us all to have a confidence. Okay, we're doing the best we can, and we're going to take some risks, right? Because not without risks, but it's we have confidence that we're all working together, and we're going to take a chance, right? I mean, it's better than just. I mean, I guess the option is like you just fold, you just lay down, right? And so so I'm grateful that we haven't stopped fighting.
Well, Tom, I want to ask you 10 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Where you just say the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh dear.
There's no wrong answer. Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
Just two people came right into my mind. So the first one was just because I mentioned him earlier was Trent Baker was my boss at Earthlink, right? Yeah. And the second one is Tim Sandoval, is our current mayor here in the city. Yeah.
All right, 5 words that most describe you.
Energetic. I don't know. Persistent. Oof, I gotta come up with 3 more.
A humble servant leader. I'll add those 3. What's your favorite author, book, or movie?
Oh boy, author, book, or movie.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's really tough. I don't find a lot of time to read anymore, but I've really enjoyed Orson Scott Card's writing. Sci-fi. I'm a sci-fi kind of junkie, and then movie wise, I mean, I guess one of the few DVDs I still own, is the extended version of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Love it.
So I guess I have to put that on the list.
All right, favorite food.
Favorite food. My mom's Chinese cooking.
All right, what's a surprising fact about you?
A surprising fact. Oh dear. I don't know. I guess because I don't surprise myself, it's hard to know what would be surprising to others.
Well, you've been married to your wife for a long time, so we'll go with that. You've been married a long time.
Yeah, we've been married. It'll be 23 yees.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful for her. I mean, so we talked about humility earlier, right? I think, I think one of the gifts to my life has been my wife Bree, who herself's a very humble person. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess, the amount of gifts, the amount of work, the impact that she's had in many organizations as well as the city has been incredible, but also in my life. Yeah. Right. How she has helped shape, transform, challenge, rebuked, exhorted, right? All those things that I've needed over the years. So I'm so grateful for her.
All right. Favorite place you've been?
Ooh. My wife and I really enjoy the Central Coast of California. There's a lot of lovely trails along the bluffs on the coast that I feel like I could just, those are just amazing places.
Where's somewhere you want to go that you have not been?
Ooh. The thing that pops in my mind is all the places my wife would like to be. We have not been.
Well, you have access to planes to get there, so that's good.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. Someone asked me like, "Oh, do you hop on a jet and go down to this, other cities to grab tacos or something?" No. One time I'll tell you the story. It's kind of funny. When we were in Alaska, I had my family come visit us in Alaska. And wanted to show off, one of our planes. So it's about 11 of us or so, and I wanted to kick them on one of the trip, on the flights in Raven, Alaska. And so went down to the ticket counter and purchase, tickets for our family to get on this flight. And the clerk there, looked at me and says, "Sir, you're the CEO of the company." We could just issue these tickets to you. Okay? I'm like, no. This is a private, this is a personal trip, and so I don't mind paying for it. And plus, I hear it's a pretty good company, so I don't mind giving it my money.
I love that. All right. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Ooh. Okay, since we were just talking about my wife and how long we've been married, like when I was dating my wife, when we were, courting, right? I thought of myself as actively courting her. But at one point, I had kind of this, a freaked out moment. Where I was like, what am I doing? I can't, it's gonna, how this is gonna impact all the other things I'm doing. I'm so committed to this project and that project and this thing and my work and am I being selfish or, doing the wrong thing, spending all this time, dating, courting, and consider like breaking up with Bree at that point, and I was sharing this with my roommate John Fries, who's another wonderful man that was called to the internship, and we were working in the city together, and he amazing godly guy, but he looked at me and says, "Tom, you're an idiot."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it paid off in the end.
It paid off, yeah.
All right. And finally, why do you think a podcast on servant leadership is important?
Because people need to know that you can be a servant leader, and servant leadership can work, right? And not only work, it can be a blessing. I think we have so many examples of leaders that who aren't servants. We have, lots of examples of, very. I'm not sure what but bad examples.
Yeah.
Negative examples, bad actors in leadership roles. And sometimes people can get discouraged and feel like, well, you need, somehow like you need to behave like that to be a leader, right? You need to behave like that to be in charge or to change things or to lead things. And that's just not true. And thank you for proving that fact, right? With this podcast, right? By providing examples that, no, we don't have to be that way. Positive change, positive growth, tremendous success, can happen, with servant leadership, right? And we can create prosperity with an environment that is not damaging to people, right? That's not toxic. That's not disparaging. That people don't go home from their project or their work or their nonprofit or whatever, feeling, being down, or being worn out, being used up, but instead, feel, invigorated, right? Feel like they're part of something bigger. Feel like they're part of a community that cares, right? And I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, I talk about the sense of shalom, right? Peace and well-being. Not only do I desire that for our city and for many cities, and for our world, I desire that for our workplaces. I desire that for our institutions, and but the leaders set the tone, right? And so thank you for for this podcast. Thank you for showing showing the world that there are other ways to do this.
Well, thank you for your willingness to be on. I'm glad that our audience is getting to hear your story and also just be inspired by you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.